For more than 150 years, visitors to a house in Old Town San Diego have reported hearing heavy footsteps echoing through empty rooms. Some believe those footsteps belong to a man named Yankee Jim Robinson, a man who was executed on the property years before the house was ever built. Others have reported hearing a crying baby, smelling perfume that seems to come from nowhere, and even seeing apparitions believed to be members of the Whaley family. What really happened on this property, and why is the Whaley House still considered one of the most haunted locations in America? Today, we're taking a closer look at the history, the claims, the witnesses, and the legacy of the Whaley House. Hello and welcome to Haunted Thursday, a special mini-series from the Halloween podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. Each week on Haunted Thursday, we'll explore a haunted location, ghost story, or paranormal mystery and examine the history behind it. We'll look at what happened, who experienced it, what evidence has been reported, and why people are still talking about it today. For our very first Haunted Thursday, we're heading to Old Town San Diego, California, to investigate a location that has been called one of the most haunted houses in America. This is the story of the Whaley House. Before we can talk about the ghost stories, we need to talk about the place itself. The Whaley House is located in the Old Town neighborhood of San Diego, California. Today, Old Town is considered the birthplace of California and is one of the most historic areas in the state. Millions of visitors pass through the district each year to experience its museums, shops, restaurants, and preserved historic buildings. Among those buildings stands the Whaley House. Construction on the home was completed in 1857 by Thomas Whaley, a businessman who had moved to San Diego after spending time in San Francisco during the California Gold Rush. At the time, the house was considered one of the finest homes in Southern California. It was built using bricks made in Whaley's own brickyard and featured architectural details that were uncommon for the region. But the Whaley House was more than just a family residence. Over the years, the building served as a general store, a courthouse, a theater, a ballroom, and even a school. It became one of the most important buildings in early San Diego history and played a role in the development of the growing community. Today, the house operates as a museum and historical landmark. Visitors can walk through the rooms, learn about the Whaley family, and hear the stories that have surrounded the property for generations. And it's those stories that have made the Whaley House famous far beyond San Diego. For many people, the house isn't known for its architecture or its role in California history. It's known for its ghosts. But before we get to the reports of footsteps, apparitions, and unexplained voices, we need to understand the people who lived there and the events that shaped the property's reputation. That's where our story takes us next, into the lives of the Whaley family and a man known as Yankee Jim Robinson. The house was built by Thomas Whaley, a businessman and entrepreneur who was born in New York City in 1823. Like many Americans of his generation, he headed west seeking opportunity. After spending time in San Francisco during the Gold Rush era, he eventually settled in San Diego with his wife Anna. Thomas wasn't just building a home, he was helping build a community. Over the years, he became involved in several business ventures and quickly established himself as one of the most prominent citizens in the area. The Whaleys were respected, successful, and well known throughout San Diego. By all appearances, the family had built a promising future, but life in the 19th century was often difficult, and tragedy could strike with little warning. Thomas and Anna would raise several children in the home, including Francis, George, Thomas Jr., Violet, and Corinne. While some family members would go on to live long lives, others would face heartbreaking circumstances. One of the earliest tragedies came when the Whaley's young son, Thomas Jr., died of scarlet fever at just 18 months old. The loss devastated the family and became one of the events later connected to reports of paranormal activity in the house. Years later, another tragedy would leave an even deeper mark on the family. Their daughter Violet married against her family's wishes. The marriage quickly fell apart, and after years of emotional struggles and public embarrassment, Violet took her own life in 1885. Her death remains one of the most discussed events in the history of the Whaley House, and many visitors who believe in the paranormal point to Violet as one of the spirits said to remain there. But before any of these family tragedies occurred, another story had already become attached to the property. It's a story that happened years before the house was built, a story involving a man known as Yankee Jim Robinson. And according to local legend, his presence may have been felt in the house from the very beginning. Long before the Whaley House was built, the land it sits on had already witnessed one of the most infamous events in early San Diego history. The story centers around a man named James Yankee Jim Robinson. Robinson was convicted of stealing a small boat in 1852, a crime that at the time was considered grand larceny. He was sentenced to death and publicly hanged near the location where the Whaley House would later be built. According to historical accounts, the execution did not go smoothly. Yankee Jim was reportedly over 6 feet tall, and when he was hanged, the rope was too short. Instead of dying instantly from a broken neck, witnesses claimed he slowly strangled to death while struggling for several minutes. Newspapers and local accounts described the execution as disturbing, and it became one of the most talked about events in the young settlement. Adding another layer to the story, Thomas Whaley himself was reportedly present and witnessed the execution. A few years later, when Whaley decided to build his home on the same property, some people questioned the decision. According to family accounts, Thomas reportedly dismissed concerns and believed the location would make an excellent site for his new home. Whether he gave any thought to the execution remains unknown. What is known is that strange stories began circulating not long after the family moved in. Some accounts claim the Whaleys themselves heard heavy footsteps moving through the house. Others suggest visitors and guests were the first to report unexplained sounds. Over time, those footsteps became associated with Yankee Jim. But the execution wasn't the only tragedy connected to the property. As we discussed in the previous section, the Whaley family would endure heartbreaking losses of their own. The death of young Thomas Jr. and the suicide of Violet Whaley would later become part of the house's haunted reputation. For believers, the combination of a public execution, family tragedy, and decades of reported paranormal activity created the perfect conditions for a haunting. For skeptics, those same events may have simply provided the foundation for a legend that has continued to grow with each passing generation. Either way, the stage was set, and before long people began reporting experiences they couldn't explain. That's where the haunting claims begin. Today, the Whaley House is best known not for its history, but for the reports of paranormal activity that have been associated with it for generations. The most famous claim involves the sound of heavy footsteps. Visitors, employees, and members of the Whaley family have all reportedly heard the distinct sound of boots walking through the house when no one else was present. Over time, these footsteps became linked to Yankee Jim Robinson, the man who was executed on the property in 1852. According to the legend, his spirit continues to walk the grounds where he met his death. But the footsteps are far from the only reports. Over the years, visitors have claimed to hear the sounds of children laughing or talking in empty rooms. Others have reported hearing the cries of a baby, which some have connected to the Whaley's young son, Thomas Jr., who died at just 18 months old. There have also been reports of piano music and violin music seemingly coming from within the house when no musicians were present. Visual sightings have also become part of the legend. Some visitors claim to have seen the figure of a man moving through the house before disappearing. Others report seeing a woman in a long dress, while some believe they have encountered members of the Whaley family themselves. One of the most frequently discussed spirits is Violet Whaley, whose tragic death in 1885 remains one of the defining moments in the family's history. Not every report involves seeing or hearing something. Some visitors describe suddenly smelling lavender perfume in certain areas of the house, despite there being no obvious source. Others report cold spots, feelings of being watched, or an overwhelming sense that someone else is standing nearby. There are even stories involving animals. Some witnesses have claimed to see a small dog appear briefly inside the house before vanishing just as quickly as it appeared. It's important to note that these are reports and claims, not proven facts. People have experienced different things at different times, and not every visitor reports unusual activity. But taken together, these accounts have helped build the Whaley House's reputation as one of America's most famous haunted locations. The next question becomes an important one. Who is actually reporting these experiences? Are these just stories passed down through the years? Or do we have named witnesses who have publicly described what they experienced? That's what we'll examine next. One of the reasons the Whaley House continues to attract attention is that the reports don't come from just one source. Over the years, claims of paranormal activity have been made by family members, museum employees, visitors, investigators, and even a few well-known public figures. According to various accounts, reports of unexplained footsteps date back to the Whaley family themselves. Some stories claim that family members heard the sounds of heavy boots moving through the house, despite finding no one there. These reports would eventually become linked to the legend of Yankee Jim Robinson. As the house transitioned into a historic site, employees began sharing their own experiences. Museum curators and staff members have spoken publicly about unusual occurrences inside the building. In newspaper interviews, curators including June Reading and Wayne M. Cook discussed reports from both employees and visitors. These accounts included unexplained sounds, strange sensations, and occasional reports of apparitions. Visitors have also played a major role in building the house's reputation. Thousands of people tour the Whaley House each year, and over the decades many have shared stories of hearing footsteps, smelling perfume, feeling cold spots, or sensing an unseen presence. While individual experiences can be difficult to verify, the sheer number of reports has helped keep the legend alive. One particularly interesting account came from television personality Regis Philbin. During a visit to the Whaley House, Philbin reportedly described experiencing something unusual while touring the property. Stories like these often receive media attention and introduce the haunting to people who may have never heard of the Whaley House before.
So now we get to the room where I sat one night, late night, with a friend of mine, and I saw something on the wall, and he did too. And I'd like to go back into that area, show you exactly what I went through. And this is it.
This is the room.
This was like the living room. And we sat over here, and it seemed to me like the couch was here, and I was sitting at one end, and he was sitting at the other. And I remember the archway. I think in my original story on the show, I mentioned there was an archway. And there it is. So,
there it is.
And I was with a Marine friend of mine who didn't believe in any of this, but he had the patience to sit around with me, and we made a tour of the house as we just did. Wound up here, hung here, all the lights were out in the house, and I was a little intimidated by him because he said, "See, I told you there's nothing." And then I saw something through that arch. I said, "Something's happening there." I looked over to him, and he was on the floor. He was crawling up past this little table, and he was going right up to the wall. He was going to tackle the ghost. But the thing that I regret in my whole life is that I stood up with that flashlight, and like an idiot, I flipped it on, and the ghost was gone.
Paranormal investigators have also spent years examining the property. Various groups have conducted investigations using cameras, audio recorders, and other equipment in hopes of documenting evidence of paranormal activity. While investigators have reported capturing unusual sounds and experiences, interpretations of that evidence vary widely depending on who is examining it. What's important here is not whether every claim is true. What's important is that the reports come from a wide variety of people over a long period of time. Some are employees who spent years inside the house. Some are visitors who were there only a few minutes. Some arrived hoping to experience something paranormal, while others may have had no expectations at all. So the question becomes, what evidence, if any, has been offered to support these claims? And is there anything that separates the Whaley House from hundreds of other locations that are said to be haunted? When discussing haunted locations, evidence can be one of the most challenging topics. Unlike historical records, paranormal evidence is often subjective. What one person considers proof, another may see as coincidence, misinterpretation, or something that simply can't be verified. In the case of the Whaley House, much of the evidence comes from eyewitness testimony. Over the years, visitors, employees, and investigators have reported hearing the same types of phenomena repeatedly. Heavy footsteps are perhaps the most common report. The fact that similar experiences have been described by different people over many decades is one reason believers find the stories compelling. Newspaper coverage has also helped document these claims. Articles dating back decades discuss reports from museum staff and visitors who described unusual sounds, unexplained scents, and sightings of apparitions. While newspaper articles do not prove a haunting, they do provide a historical record showing that these stories have persisted for generations rather than appearing only in recent years. The Whaley House has also been the subject of numerous paranormal investigations. Investigators have used audio recorders, photography, video equipment, and environmental monitoring devices in an attempt to document unusual activity. Some groups have reported capturing unexplained sounds or electronic voice phenomena. These recordings are typically described as voices or sounds that were not heard at the time they were recorded. Photographs have also played a role in the house's reputation. Over the years, visitors and investigators have claimed to capture strange figures, unusual shadows, or unexplained anomalies in photographs taken inside the building. As with many paranormal photographs, interpretations vary widely. Some viewers see evidence of apparitions, while others believe the images can be explained by lighting, reflections, camera limitations, or simple pareidolia. The tendency for our brains to find recognizable patterns where none actually exist. Another piece of evidence often cited by believers is the consistency of the reports. Visitors who have never met one another frequently describe similar experiences: footsteps, a feeling of being watched, the scent of perfume, unexplained sounds coming from empty rooms. While consistency doesn't prove a haunting, it does raise an interesting question. Why do so many people report similar experiences in the same location? Of course, evidence is only one side of the story. For every person who believes the Whaley House is genuinely haunted, there are others who believe there are perfectly reasonable explanations for what people experience there. And that's where the skeptics enter the conversation. Not everyone who visits the Whaley House leaves convinced they've encountered something paranormal. In fact, skeptics argue that many of the experiences reported at the house can be explained without involving ghosts at all. One of the most common explanations involves the power of suggestion. The Whaley House has been promoted as a haunted location for decades. Visitors often arrive already knowing the stories of Yankee Jim, Violet Whaley, and the other reported spirits associated with the property. Skeptics suggest that when people enter a location expecting something unusual to happen, they may become more aware of normal sounds, shadows, and sensations that would otherwise go unnoticed. The age of the building is another factor often mentioned. The Whaley House was built in 1857 and has stood through earthquakes, changing weather conditions, and more than a century and a half of use. Old buildings naturally creak, settle, and produce sounds that can sometimes seem mysterious, especially in quiet environments where visitors are actively listening for unusual activity. Environmental factors can also play a role. Changes in temperature, drafts, lighting conditions, and even the layout of a building can create experiences that feel unusual or unsettling. A cold spot may have a perfectly natural explanation. A shadow seen out of the corner of someone's eye may be caused by lighting conditions rather than an apparition. Skeptics also point to the nature of eyewitness testimony itself. Human memory is not perfect. Stories can change over time, details can be added or forgotten, and experiences may be influenced by what people hear from others. This doesn't mean witnesses are being dishonest. It simply means that personal experiences can be difficult to verify, especially when discussing events that happened years or even decades earlier. When it comes to photographs and recordings, skeptics often suggest more ordinary explanations as well. Camera reflections, dust particles, lens flares, background noise, and audio interference can sometimes create results that appear mysterious at first glance. What's interesting about the Whaley House is that neither side has managed to completely settle the debate. Believers point to generations of similar reports, while skeptics point to psychology, environmental factors, and the challenges of verifying paranormal claims. And perhaps that's part of the reason the story has endured for so long. The mystery remains unsolved. But whether someone believes the house is haunted or not, there's no denying that the Whaley House has left a lasting mark on American paranormal culture. Whether you believe the Whaley House is haunted or not, there's no question that it has earned a place in both California history and American paranormal folklore. More than 165 years after it was built, the house remains one of the most visited historic sites in San Diego. Tourists from around the world come to learn about the Whaley family, explore the building's history, and, for some, see if they experience anything unusual for themselves. The house has also become a fixture in paranormal media. Over the years, it has been featured in books, newspaper articles, television programs, documentaries, and countless online discussions. Its reputation as one of America's most haunted houses has been reinforced generation after generation, helping to keep the stories alive long after the original events took place. Part of the reason the Whaley House continues to capture people's attention is that it sits at the intersection of documented history and unexplained claims. The people were real. The tragedies were real. The execution of Yankee Jim Robinson really happened. The deaths within the Whaley family are part of the historical record. What remains open to interpretation are the experiences reported by those who have visited the house. Unlike some haunted locations that rely almost entirely on legend, the Whaley House has a well-documented history that gives people something tangible to connect with. Visitors aren't just hearing a ghost story. They're walking through rooms where real people lived, worked, celebrated, and mourned. The house also serves as a reminder of how stories evolve over time. A reported footstep becomes a ghost. A family tragedy becomes part of a haunting. A newspaper article becomes a local legend. Over decades and generations, those stories grow into something larger than the events that inspired them. Today, the Whaley House stands as both a historical landmark and a paranormal icon. Its reputation has survived changing generations, changing technologies, and changing attitudes toward the supernatural. And perhaps that's the real reason we're still talking about it. Not because everyone agrees it's haunted, but because no one has been able to completely explain away the stories that continue to surround it. Which brings us to the final part of our investigation, separating what we know from what we believe. Before we close the case on the Whaley House, let's separate the documented facts from the reported experiences and the legends that have grown around the property over the years. The documented history of the Whaley House is well established. We know that Thomas Whaley was a real person. We know he built the house in 1857. We know that the property had previously been the site of the execution of James Yankee Jim Robinson in 1852. We also know that the Whaley family experienced genuine tragedies, including the death of their infant son, Thomas Jr., and the suicide of their daughter, Violet. These events are supported by historical records and are not in dispute. We also know that reports of paranormal activity have been associated with the house for decades. Newspaper articles, museum staff, visitors, and investigators have all documented claims of footsteps, voices, apparitions, strange scents, and other unusual experiences. While these reports are real in the sense that people have made them, the experiences themselves cannot be independently verified after the fact. Then there are the legends. Stories have developed over the years about specific spirits said to haunt the house. Yankee Jim is often described as the source of the mysterious footsteps. Violet Whaley is frequently mentioned in reports of apparitions. Other stories involve a young girl, a ghostly dog, and additional spirits said to wander the property. Some of these stories are supported by witness accounts, while others appear to have evolved through decades of retellings. So, where does that leave us? The facts tell us that the Whaley House has a fascinating and sometimes tragic history. The reports tell us that many people have experienced something they could not explain. The legends attempt to explain those experiences. Whether those legends are rooted in paranormal activity, psychology, folklore, or some combination of all three is a question that remains unanswered. And perhaps that's exactly why the Whaley House continues to capture our imagination all these years later. As someone who grew up in Southern California, the Whaley House has always been one of those places I heard about long before I ever started researching haunted locations. It's one of those rare places where the history alone is enough to make it interesting. You don't need the ghost stories to make the Whaley House worth visiting. The execution of Yankee Jim Robinson is a documented historical event. The Whaley family's tragedies are part of the historical record. The building itself played an important role in the early history of San Diego. What I find most interesting isn't any single ghost story, it's the consistency of the reports. For more than a century, people have continued to describe many of the same experiences: footsteps, apparitions, strange sounds, unexplained scents. That doesn't automatically mean the house is haunted, but it does raise an interesting question. Why do so many people continue to report similar experiences generation after generation? At the same time, I can understand the skeptical perspective. The Whaley House is one of the most famous haunted locations in America. Most visitors arrive already knowing the stories. When you enter a place with that kind of reputation, it's natural to pay closer attention to every sound and every shadow. For me, the most compelling part of this story isn't whether the house is haunted. It's the fact that people are still having this conversation nearly 170 years after the house was built. Very few buildings remain part of the public conversation for that long. Fewer still become part of both local history and paranormal folklore. Whether the reports are paranormal, psychological, environmental, or something else entirely, the Whaley House has earned its place as one of America's most enduring haunted legends. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever visited the Whaley House? Did you experience anything unusual while you were there? Maybe you've heard footsteps in an empty building. Maybe you visited another location that people claim is haunted. Or maybe you've had an experience that you still can't explain. Call the Halloween Podcast hotline and leave us a message. 731-400-0472. Tell us your story, where it happened, and what you experienced. Your story may be featured in a future episode of Haunted Thursday. And here's this week's question. Do you think the reputation of a haunted location influences what people experience? Or do you believe places like the Whaley House are genuinely haunted? I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's going to do it for this first edition of Haunted Thursday. I hope you enjoyed our look at the history, the claims, the witnesses, and the legacy of the Whaley House in San Diego, California. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the Halloween Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to call the hotline and share your own paranormal experiences. Until next Thursday, keep Halloween alive every day. Have a good night. Sources for this episode included historical records, newspaper archives, museum information, and published works on the history and hauntings of the Whaley House.